Hello and welcome to the channel Tales After Midnight. Tonight's story takes us high above wartime Europe, into a moment so extreme that it defies everything we think we know about survival. Now let's begin. At 11:47 a.m. on November 29, 1943, Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran crouched inside the tail section of a B-17F Flying Fortress nicknamed Rikki Tikki Tavi as German flak ripped through the fuselage more than 20,000 feet above the city of Bremen. The 19-year-old tail gunner was flying only his 5th combat mission with the 8th Air Force's 96th Bomb Group. By that moment, 8 of his 9 crewmates were already dead. The mission had begun 4 hours earlier at RAF Snetterton Heath in England. That morning, 346 B-17 Flying Fortresses lifted off and formed up, heading east toward Bremen's industrial targets. The city was one of the most heavily defended in Germany. In the previous month alone, Bremen's anti-aircraft batteries had destroyed 64 bombers. Moran's squadron had already lost 11 tail gunners since September. As the formation crossed the German coast at 23,000 feet, Moran scanned the sky through his twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns. The tail position offered the widest field of view of any station on the aircraft, but it also meant isolation. He was completely alone, sealed into the narrow rear compartment. No one could reach him through the cramped crawl space. If something went wrong back here, he would face it alone. German fighters struck first. Messerschmitt Bf-109s dove in from above, their 20mm cannons flashing. Moran tracked one fighter closing in from the 6 o'clock position and squeezed both triggers. The guns roared. Empty brass casings clattered around his boots as the aircraft vibrated. The German fighter rolled away, trailing smoke. Then the flak began. Black bursts erupted all around the formation, violent blossoms of smoke and fire. Each explosion hurled razor-sharp shrapnel outward at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Moran felt the impacts hammer the aircraft, each hit shuddering through the metal frame. Suddenly, the intercom went dead. Through the rear window, Moran watched Rikki Tikki Tavi begin to slide backward out of formation. German fighters immediately swarmed toward the straggler. Cannon rounds slammed into the fuselage from multiple directions. Moran fired back, swinging his guns as fast as he could, but the attacks came from every angle at once. Then came a massive explosion. The nose of the aircraft vanished in a sheet of flame. The bombardier, navigator, pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer were gone in an instant. Seconds later, another shell tore through the radio compartment, killing 3 more crewmen in the waist section. Only Moran and the navigator were still alive. The navigator bailed out. Moran was now completely alone. He reached for his parachute. What he saw made his stomach drop. The silk canopy was shredded, riddled with bullet holes. The harness straps were torn and frayed. Even if he could jump, the parachute would never open. There was no way out. Then came the hit that changed everything. A direct flak strike tore through the aircraft and severed the tail section completely. The explosion was deafening. The entire tail assembly ripped free from the fuselage. Moran felt a violent lurch as gravity took hold. He was falling, still trapped inside the tail section, 20,000 feet above Germany, with no working parachute. The tail did not plunge straight down. The vertical and horizontal stabilizers acted like crude airfoils. The broken section began to glide, spinning slowly as it descended. Moran clutched the handles of his guns, bracing himself. No manual, no training, no combat briefing had ever covered what to do when your airplane breaks in half. Through the rear window, he saw German fighters circling. They assumed everyone aboard was dead. They were wrong. Moran was still alive, and his guns still worked. As a fighter swooped past, he aimed and fired. Tracer rounds arced through the sky. The German pilot banked sharply away, clearly startled that the severed tail section was firing back. Moran kept shooting as the tail continued its strange, spiraling glide downward through the freezing German air. German anti-aircraft crews on the ground saw the falling tail section and opened fire. Moran was now being shot at from above by fighters and from below by flak batteries, all while falling inside a torn-off piece of his bomber. The altimeter was still functioning. 19,000 feet. 18,000. The ground seemed to rush closer with terrifying speed. Moran's head slammed against the gun sight. Blood streamed down into his eyes. His ribs cracked as his body smashed against the gun mounts, but he refused to let go. 16,000 feet. 15,000. Below him were fields, forests, and the town of Psyche, about 12 miles south of Bremen. 14,000 feet. 13,000. He tried the escape hatch. It wouldn't move. The frame had warped during the explosion. He was locked inside a metal coffin, falling at more than 100 miles per hour. 12,000 feet. 11,000. The spinning force slammed him against the bulkhead. The pressure was so intense that gold fillings and even his molars popped loose from his mouth. 10,000 feet. 9,000. The trees below were now clearly visible. The glide of the tail section began to flatten slightly. The stabilizers were doing something, slowing him just a little. 8,000 feet. 7,000. Moran braced himself. There was no way to steer. No way to slow down. No way out. 6,000 feet. 5,000. The forest rushed upward. 4,000 feet. 3,000. The tail section plunged toward the woods outside Psyche. Moran could see individual pine trees now, their branches reaching upward like dark, grasping fingers. The section was still spinning, still gliding at a steep angle, but gravity was winning. 2,000 feet. 1,000. The impact came without warning. The tail section smashed into the tops of the pine trees. Branches snapped and exploded apart. The metal framework screamed as it twisted. The vertical stabilizer caught on a thick trunk, and the entire section pivoted violently, bleeding off speed. More branches shattered. Aluminum skin tore away as the tail cartwheeled through the canopy. Then it hit the ground. The final impact drove Moran's head into the gun sight. His skull cracked. Blood poured from his scalp. His ribs, already fractured from the descent, broke completely. Both forearms snapped as they slammed against the gun mounts. The pain was instant and overwhelming, but he was alive. Moran tried to move. His arms didn't respond. Broken. Every breath sent agony through his chest. Broken ribs. His head throbbed violently. Crushed skull. Blood filled his eyes, blurring his vision. Then he heard voices. German voices. Boots crunching over leaves and broken branches. Someone was coming. Two men appeared through the wreckage. They wore tattered civilian clothing, not Wehrmacht uniforms, not Luftwaffe ground crew. These were prisoners. Serbian prisoners of war who had been working nearby when they saw the tail section fall from the sky. Both men were doctors, captured by the Germans years earlier and forced to work in labor camps. When they saw the American tail section crash into the forest, they ran toward it. They expected to find a. Instead, they found Moran, barely conscious, choking and drowning in his own blood. The Serbian doctors had no equipment, no medicine, no proper bandages, but they had knowledge and experience. They pulled Moran from the twisted wreckage and laid him carefully on the forest floor. One doctor stabilized his head while the other examined his injuries. A crushed skull, shattered forearms, broken ribs, and likely severe internal bleeding. They knew German patrols would arrive at any moment, so they worked fast. One tore strips of fabric from his own shirt to bind Moran's broken arms, while the other pressed down on the head wound, trying desperately to slow the bleeding. Within minutes, German soldiers appeared, rifles raised, surrounding the crash site. When they saw Moran, motionless, blood-soaked, barely breathing, they lowered their weapons. This man was no threat. He was almost dead. The soldiers placed Moran onto a stretcher, and the Serbian doctors insisted on going with him. After a brief exchange, the Germans allowed it. Moran was transported to a military hospital in Bremen, the same city he had been sent to bomb only hours earlier. There, German doctors examined him and shook their heads. His injuries were catastrophic. The crushed skull alone should have killed him. Several broken ribs had punctured his lungs. His forearms were shattered beyond clean repair. He had lost an enormous amount of blood. By every medical standard, survival was impossible. Still, the Serbian doctors refused to abandon him. They remained at his side through the night, watching his breathing, checking his pulse again and again. Despite orders to prioritize their own wounded, German medical staff quietly provided whatever supplies they could spare. Moran drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, the pain was unbearable. When unconscious, he dreamed only of falling, endlessly falling, the tail section spinning, the ground rushing closer, trees rising up to meet him. 3 days passed, then 4. Slowly, his condition stabilized. The crushed skull began to mend, though the pressure on his brain remained dangerous. His ribs started to heal. His forearms were still useless, but the bones were setting in place. On the 5th day, German intelligence officers arrived. They demanded information, bombing targets, formation tactics, radio frequencies. Moran gave them nothing. Name, rank, serial number. That was all. The interrogations continued for 2 weeks. Threats, promises of better treatment, long hours of isolation, nothing worked. Moran remained silent. Eventually, they stopped trying. On December 14, 1943, German guards loaded him onto a truck with other prisoners. For 3 days, the truck traveled east across Germany. Moran sat in the back with 14 other American airmen. His arms were still held in crude splints. The head wound had scabbed over, but infection was setting in. Every jolt of the road sent fresh agony through his broken ribs. On December 17th, they arrived at Stalag Luft 3. The camp held nearly 10,000 Allied airmen in wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. At the gate, guards searched each prisoner, confiscating Moran's dog tags, his wedding ring, and the few personal items he still carried. The barracks were bitterly cold. Each room held 32 men stacked in wooden bunks. A single coal stove offered heat, but coal was rationed sparingly. 2 blankets per man. That winter, temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below zero. Food was issued twice a day. Breakfast was a single slice of black bread and ersatz coffee made from burned barley. Dinner was thin soup, sometimes with a few potato peelings floating in it. Red Cross parcels arrived, but most were seized by guards. Prisoners received 1 parcel a month instead of 1 per week. Moran's arms healed incorrectly. Without proper medical treatment, the bones fused at unnatural angles. He could move his fingers, but his forearms remained twisted and weak. Simple tasks became impossible: buttoning a shirt, tying boots, holding a spoon. Other prisoners helped him without question. The camp operated a secret radio, assembled from smuggled parts over 18 months and hidden inside a false wall in Barracks 14. Each night, selected men listened to BBC broadcasts and wrote down the news, which spread through the camp by morning. In January 1944, they heard that Allied bombing raids over Germany were intensifying. In February came news of Monte Cassino. In March, reports of heavy air attacks on Berlin. Each update meant more bombers overhead, more crews shot down, more prisoners arriving at Stalag Luft 3. On March 24, 1944, the camp erupted into chaos when 76 prisoners escaped through a tunnel called Harry. They had spent over a year digging 30 feet underground to get beneath the wire. The tunnel stretched 336 feet from Barracks 104 into the forest beyond the fence. The escape lasted a single night. By dawn, German guards discovered the tunnel. A massive manhunt followed. 70,000 troops, police, and Hitler Youth mobilized across Germany. Within 2 weeks, 73 escapees were recaptured. 50 were executed by the Gestapo, shot individually at separate locations on direct orders from Hitler. The remaining 23 were returned to the camp. Their names were posted on a bulletin board. When the prisoners read the list of the dead, the camp fell completely silent. Security tightened immediately. Roll calls increased from twice a day to 5 times. All movement after dark was banned. Barracks were searched weekly. Tools, wire, anything useful for digging was confiscated. Moran watched it all from his bunk. His arms were slowly regaining some function, but he was still unable to work effectively. The other prisoners included him anyway, sharing food, helping him dress, telling him stories of home. Months passed. Summer arrived. The war dragged on. On June 6th, the secret radio reported the landings in Normandy. Today, prisoners celebrated quietly, careful not to draw attention. Guards doubled their vigilance. By the autumn of 1944, the Eastern Front was collapsing as Soviet armies pushed relentlessly toward Germany, a fact the secret radio confirmed night after night. Russian tanks reported at 300 miles away, then 200, then 100. On January 27, 1945, German guards ordered a full evacuation of the camp. Soviet forces were less than 50 miles away. The march began at 4 a.m. in the middle of a blizzard. Nearly 10,000 prisoners formed columns on the road outside Stalag Luft 3, each man carrying a single blanket and whatever scraps of food he had managed to save. No additional rations were issued. The temperature stood at 15 degrees below zero. Guards told them they were marching west, away from the Soviet advance, but gave no destination and no distance. Anyone who fell behind would be shot. At dawn, the column moved out. Moran's arms still ached from the injuries sustained 13 months earlier. His ribs had healed, but the cold made every breath painful. He wrapped his blanket around his shoulders and began to walk. The first man died on the second day, an American bombardier from Ohio who collapsed into the snow. Guards dragged his body to the roadside and forced the column onward. By the third day, 4 more were dead. By the end of the first week, 23 bodies lay frozen along the route. The prisoners marched 12 hours a day, allowed 10-minute breaks every 2 hours. At night, they were herded into barns, churches, or sometimes left to sleep in open fields. Snow fell constantly, and temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Hunger became the only thought. Guards issued no food. Prisoners ate snow for water. Some dug frozen potatoes from fields. Others stripped bark from trees. A few traded personal belongings to German civilians for bread, but most starved. After the first week, Moran's feet blistered badly. The blisters burst and became infected, and he could feel fluid sloshing in his boots with every step. Others suffered worse. Frostbite turned fingers and toes black. Men lost parts of their feet and kept walking because stopping meant death. The march dragged through February, covering 20 miles on good days, 10 on average, and sometimes only 5 when blizzards reduced visibility to nothing. Guards pushed them forward regardless. By mid-February, the column had covered 200 miles, passing through abandoned German towns where civilians watched silently from windows, offering no help. Everyone knew the war was ending, that Germany was collapsing, but the march continued. Some prisoners tried to escape. Most failed. Near the woods outside Schremberg, 3 men ran and were shot. Their bodies were left where they fell as a warning. Others simply sat down in the snow and refused to continue. Guards shot them as well. 73 prisoners died in the first month alone. After that, the survivors stopped counting. Moran kept walking. His infected feet screamed with every step. His arms ached constantly. His ribs throbbed in the cold. Still, he moved, one step at a time, hour after hour, day after day. The column crossed into central Germany. Soviet artillery rumbled behind them. American bombers passed overhead heading east. The guards grew nervous. They knew the war was lost, but they obeyed their orders. Keep the prisoners moving, do not let them fall into enemy hands. On March 15, 1945, after 47 days of marching, the column reached the town of Bitterfeld. Guards herded the prisoners into an abandoned factory building, claiming the stop was temporary and transport would arrive soon. The prisoners collapsed onto the concrete floor, many unable to stand. Moran's feet had swollen so badly his boots could not be removed. 3 weeks passed inside the factory. Guards brought no food. Prisoners survived on scraps found in the building. Rats were hunted, killed, and roasted over small fires. Others ate grass and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. Moran's weight dropped below 100 pounds. He had weighed 165 when his B-17 was shot down 16 months earlier. His ribs pressed visibly through his skin. His face was skeletal. His infected feet oozed constantly. Others were worse. Dysentery spread rapidly. Men too weak to stand soiled themselves where they lay. The stench was overpowering. Guards remained outside and brought no medicine, no bandages, nothing. On April 8th, the prisoners heard artillery, close artillery, from the west. American artillery, growing louder each day. Guards became agitated. Some argued, others vanished during the night. By April 10th, small arms fire echoed through Bitterfeld as American infantry entered the town. The German guards abandoned the factory, leaving the doors unlocked and simply walking away. The prisoners were too weak to celebrate. Most lay on the floor listening to the battle outside, the rattle of machine guns, tank cannons, and the sharp crack of M1 Garand rifles. On April 11, 1945, at 2 p.m., soldiers of the U.S. 104th Infantry Division kicked open the factory doors and stopped cold at what they saw, hundreds of skeletal men lying in filth. The smell hit instantly, forcing several soldiers back outside to vomit. A medic entered first, moving from body to body, checking pulses and assessing who might still be saved. When he reached Moran, he shook his head. The Wisconsin farm boy was barely breathing, his pulse faint, his feet gangrenous, his body shutting down. Stretchers were called in. Prisoners were carried outside to waiting ambulances. Moran drifted in and out of consciousness during transport. He remembered seeing American flags. He remembered hearing English spoken around him. He remembered crying. The field hospital lay 15 miles west. Army doctors worked through the night treating the freed prisoners. They cut away Moran's boots. His feet were black with necrosis. Amputation was considered, but the doctors decided to try saving them first. They flooded his system with sulfa drugs and penicillin, cleaned his wounds, gave him plasma, and stabilized him. His condition. On April 13th, he was transferred to a larger hospital in France. Recovery stretched on for months. The infection in his feet slowly cleared, and by June his weight climbed back to 120 pounds. His arms regained most of their function, though they remained slightly twisted from having healed improperly. On July 3, 1945, doctors cleared Moran for transport back to the United States. He boarded a hospital ship at Le Havre. The crossing lasted 8 days. On July 11th, the ship entered New York Harbor, and Moran stood on deck as the Statue of Liberty came into view. He had been gone for 2 years and 9 months. He had flown 5 combat missions. He had fallen 4 miles inside a severed tail section. He had survived 17 months as a prisoner of war. He had walked nearly 600 miles through a German winter. He was 21 years old. The ship docked at Pier 90. Army personnel helped the returning prisoners down the gangway as crowds cheered behind barriers. Someone played the national anthem over loudspeakers. Moran could not stop crying. He was home. From New York, he traveled by train to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, where Army doctors conducted full medical examinations on all returning prisoners. Every injury, every scar, every lasting effect of captivity was documented. Moran's medical report ran 11 pages: crushed skull with healed fractures, both forearms healed improperly at 15-degree angles, 6 ribs showing old fracture lines, chronic lower back pain from spinal compression during the fall, nerve damage in both feet from frostbite and infection, organ damage from malnutrition and post-traumatic stress. Doctors recommended 3 additional months of treatment. Moran refused. He wanted to go home. He wanted to see his family. He had not seen them since October 1942, nearly 3 years earlier. On July 25th, the Army granted him 30 days leave. He took a bus to Wisconsin, a 2-day ride during which he slept most of the time, still rebuilding his strength. His family met him at the bus station in Soldiers Grove. His mother did not recognize him at first. The skeletal man stepping off the bus looked nothing like the son she remembered. When she realized it was Eugene, she collapsed, and his father caught her. Moran spent August at home, sleeping in his old bed, eating his mother's cooking, and walking the farm he had left 3 years earlier. Neighbors visited daily, asking questions. What was it like? Were the Germans cruel? Did he kill anyone? How did he survive the fall? Moran answered some, but others he could not. Some memories were still too raw. The spinning tail section, the screaming wind, the bodies of his crewmates, the death march, the factory at Bitterfeld. On September 1, 1945, Moran returned to active duty at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin. The war with Japan had ended 2 weeks earlier, and the Army was demobilizing at a rapid pace. Millions of soldiers were being discharged. Moran's discharge papers arrived on December 1st. Final rank, Staff Sergeant. Service dates, October 1942 to December 1945. Combat missions, 5. Status, honorably discharged. His medals arrived separately, 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat, the Air Medal with a gold leaf cluster for aerial achievement, the European Theater Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the Prisoner of War Medal. There was no medal for falling 4 miles inside a severed tail section while firing back at enemy fighters. Moran returned to Soldiers Grove as a civilian. He was 22 years old, with no college education and no job prospects. The farm needed labor, so he worked planting, harvesting, and tending livestock, the same work he had done before the war. But everything felt different. The weight of tools in his twisted arms, the pain in his feet after long days standing, the nightmares that woke him every night, the sound of aircraft engines that made him freeze in place. In 1947, he met a woman named Helen at a church social. They married 6 months later. Over the next decade, they had 9 children. Moran worked construction jobs to support his family. He never complained about his injuries. He rarely spoke about the war unless directly asked. For decades, his story remained largely unknown. His crewmates were dead. The navigator who had bailed out moved to California and lost contact. The Serbian doctors who saved him vanished into the chaos of post-war Europe. German records of the incident were scattered or destroyed. In 2007, a small Wisconsin newspaper published a short article about Moran with the headline, "Local Veteran Survived Impossible Fall." The article caught the attention of John Armster, a military historian from Iowa researching 8th Air Force bomber losses over Germany. After reading it, Armster drove to Wisconsin to interview Moran, who was 83 years old and still living in Soldiers Grove. His wife Helen had died 3 years earlier. His 9 children visited often. His hands still showed the crooked angles left by his shattered forearms 64 years before. Armster spent 3 days interviewing him, recording everything. The mission briefing on November 29th, the fighter attacks, the flak, the moment the tail section tore away, the fall, the Serbian doctors, Stalag Luft 3, the death march, all of it. Moran spoke slowly and carefully, recalling details he had not shared in decades. He showed Armster his discharge papers, his medals, wartime photographs, and a letter from the navigator who had bailed out, sent in 1946 and never answered. Armster then began his own research, contacting the American Air Museum in Britain. Their records listed Rikki Tikki Tavi, serial number 42 to 30,359, assigned to the 339th Bomb Squadron, reported missing in action on November 29, 1943. Crew of 10, 8 killed in action, 2 prisoners of war. He located missing air crew report number 1392. It listed the crew names, the mission details, and the last known position where the bomber had been seen. Near Bremen, cause listed as enemy aircraft. Armster traveled to Germany and located the town of Psyche, 12 miles south of Bremen. There, he interviewed elderly residents who still remembered November 1943. Several recalled watching a detached tail section fall from the sky. One man, who had been 6 years old at the time, remembered seeing it crash into the forest while he watched from inside a bomb shelter. Independently, a German researcher named Ulf Katsch had documented the crash as well. He located the impact site deep in the woods, where fragments of aluminum skin were still buried in the soil more than 70 years later. He interviewed witnesses and mapped the debris field in detail. Armster and Katsch combined their findings, and in 2018 they organized a formal commemoration in Psyche. Moran's family was invited, and 6 of his 9 children traveled to Germany for the event. The town of Psyche erected a memorial plaque at the crash site listing the names of all 10 crew members. The dedication ceremony took place on November 29, 2018, exactly 75 years after the crash. Moran's children stood in the forest where their father had come down. They saw the trees, the clearing, and the place where the tail section had finally stopped. German citizens who had witnessed the event as children stood beside them, sharing memories and expressing gratitude that Moran had survived. The family met German researchers who had preserved the story, and they met the grandson of one of the Serbian doctors who had saved Moran's life. They visited the hospital in Bremen where German doctors had treated him, and they stood along parts of the road where the death march had passed. Moran himself was not there. He had died 4 years earlier, on March 23, 2014, at the age of 90. He had lived 69 years after falling 4 miles inside a severed B-17 tail section. But his story endured. In 2022, John Armster published a book about Moran titled Tail Spin. The book documented the entire journey: the mission, the fall, the survival, the captivity, the death march, and the long life that followed. It included photographs Armster had gathered over years of research: Moran as a young airman in 1943, the crew of Rikki Tikki Tavi standing beside their bomber, the impact site in the German forest, the memorial plaque in Psyche, and Moran in his 80s sitting in his Wisconsin home holding his Purple Hearts. Armster also interviewed aviation experts to understand how Moran survived. Aeronautical engineers analyzed the structure of the tail section. The vertical stabilizer measured 13 feet high, and the horizontal stabilizers spanned 43 feet. Together, they created enough surface area to generate lift. The weight distribution was critical. The guns, ammunition, and Moran himself were positioned toward the forward end, creating a natural balance point. The stabilizers acted like wings. The tail did not fall straight down. It glided, spinning slowly, descending at roughly 70 miles per hour instead of terminal velocity. The forest outside Psyche provided the final factor. The pine trees there rose more than 80 feet tall. The tail section struck branches at the top of the canopy, each breaking branch absorbing energy. The vertical stabilizer caught on a thick trunk, slowing the descent from around 70 miles per hour to perhaps 30, still deadly under most circumstances, but enough to give Moran a chance. Only 2 other documented cases exist of airmen surviving similar falls. British tail gunner Nicholas Alcamaide fell 18,000 feet without a parachute in March 1944 and lived. American ball turret gunner Alan McGee fell 22,000 feet and crashed through the roof of a train station in January 1943 and survived. All 3 cases shared common factors: remaining with wreckage that created drag, striking objects that broke the fall, trees for Alcamaide and Moran, a glass roof for McGee, youth, physical fitness, and extraordinary luck. Moran never considered himself lucky. He lost 8 crewmates on November 29, 1943. He spent 17 months as a prisoner of war. He endured a 600-mile death march through a German winter. He carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of his life. But he lived. He came home. He married. He raised 9 children. He worked. He built a life. He lived to be 90 years old. On October 18, 2008, the town of Soldiers Grove dedicated a street in his honor and named it Moran Way. Eugene attended the ceremony with his family at the age of 84, standing beside the new street sign, smiling, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. When someone asked how it felt to have a street named after him, he said it felt strange. He had only done what he had to do: survive, come home, and live his life. That was Eugene Paul Moran, a farm boy from Wisconsin who fell 4 miles and refused to die. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It truly helps us continue sharing these forgotten histories with people who need to hear them. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. We're uncovering more incredible survival stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered. Turn on notifications so you don't miss them, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and whether someone in your family has a World War II story that's never been told. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Eugene Moran, for showing us what the human spirit can endure. We will not forget.